Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Your host, Caroline Offenstein here. And today I have one of my favorite content creators on to talk all things femininity, your cycle, ovulation goodness. I definitely want to get into. So we have Rebecca Akat. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, my name's Rebecca. I am a menstrual cycle coach. I also work with womb healing a lot, feminine embodiment, that good stuff. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here and share more about my work with you all.
Amazing. Yeah, I think, gosh, has your work really blown up via Instagram? Because I definitely feel like I found you just through like beautiful content that you've created going viral.
Yeah, it definitely has grown. Yeah, just grown and blown up through Instagram. It's incredible what that platform can do. But yeah, I really started Bloom Womb as just a means of wanting to share this, but I never expected it to grow as fast as it did. And here we are. And I'm so grateful for it. It's been so
Yeah.
easy to connect with so many beautiful women and like have like podcast invites and just all these opportunities come to me, be able to share this work in depth in that way. So yeah, it's been amazing.
I'd love to hear more about where Bloom Womb came from. And even like, do you have a creative background or, like how do you make your content? It's so pretty and shareable. It feels like you have some sort of creative background, like either in writing or art or something. I'd love to hear more about that too.
Yeah, I mean, do I have a creative background? I've always loved creating content. So before I started Bloom Boom, I was building a business within the network marketing world. And so
Mm.
I was using my personal Instagram at the time to build a business and just share my story on there. And so I did that for 4 years, I think, 4 or 5 years, and built a six-figure business through my Instagram organically. So I think that really primed me, I guess, to now be able to create Bloom Womb and use all my tools and skill sets and creativeness to create this brand. But I never studied it. I never like went to college for it. It just kind of came to me, and I
Yeah.
just
Oh,
love creating content and putting it into like a brand to really bring a mission to life. Like it's one of my favorite things to do.
yeah. And where did the passion for Bloom Womb come from? Like the cycle coaching and things like that.
Yeah, I always say I'm like I never expected myself to be a menstrual cycle coach. Like that was never something I thought I would do with my life. I It really came from my own journey of just really seeing how much I needed to find this like connection back to my feminine and really embodying myself in that and like finding the softness and the pacing and the receiving of life. Like all of those things were really hard for me for a really long time. I was very much in my masculine and very much in fight or flight mode, survival mode. And when I started learning to just commune with my feminine, um, I started taking different like courses, reading different books on like womb healing and cycle tracking, and I started doing it for myself. And I was like, this is life changing, and I want to bring this to more women. And yeah, and so I was kind of like, I remember sitting on my friend's sofa. I was living in Arizona at the time, staying with her for a few months, and I was sitting on her sofa. I was like, I think I'm just gonna create an Instagram account and just like share this stuff, but like make it
Yeah.
fun and like kind of like meme vibe, but also yeah, just have it be like a creative outlet of mine. And I just started creating like this whole Pinterest board, and like all these ideas came to me, and yeah, and then here we are like a year and a half later, and it's just like blown up, which has been amazing and allowed me to now make it my full-time thing, which is incredible.
Yeah, and I think I've seen you share a little bit about like your story of, you just mentioned like I needed to do it for me. I needed to soften. I needed to reconnect with my feminine. I can sure relate to that. I think a lot of our listeners can with this being today and mostly at least in the US, like we are a more masculine culture, like masculine energy is more rewarded, boss bitch, hustle, work hard, put in the long hours. How does reconnecting with your femininity go hand in hand with like reconnecting with your cycle?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, I think a lot of times we don't realize that that's like the purest essence of the feminine is coming back to your cyclical nature. So it's like instead of living on someone else's timeline or on someone else's clock, allowing yourself to live with your own clock and your own timeline and pace yourself through that and not rush or think that you have to get somewhere faster. It's like allowing yourself to just come back into your body and see what is alive there and how you can meet yourself in that so that you aren't forcing, pushing, pursuing, achieving, like all of that is they're very masculine qualities and there's a time and place for them. I'm not saying to fully put that away, but finding that balance where you are prioritizing your body first and foremost by listening to your cycle and like understanding you have a monthly cycle, your hormones fluctuate, you have different parts in your cycle where your energy levels will change and you need different things, your needs change, they will, and by you just like forcing yourself through it or pushing yourself through it, you're really neglecting yourself in that, and so you're neglecting yourself as a woman in a very masculine driven world. And so coming back to the feminine is coming back to your body and to your cycle and meeting yourself where you're at in your cycle, meeting yourself at where your body is so that you can support yourself versus like pushing yourself into something that isn't actually what you need or isn't you. So that's, I think that like the core essence of being in your feminine is being in your body pretty much, which helps, which then comes through cycle awareness.
It's so interesting how, like, just thinking of that, just thinking of like, how could I honor my cycle? Let's say you're on an average 28-day cycle. I mean, it is totally different than our society today, which is more of like a 24-hour cycle, right? And like that, women just don't have that. And even just my mind immediately goes to like my background's really in fitness and nutrition. And I used to compete as a professional bodybuilder and I like never had my cycle because I was so lean. And it was very much like brushed away, even by myself, but also by others. Like, oh, no big deal. Like, whatever, you'll get it back when you put on body fat again. And we're just like, we're so, as a whole, I feel like detached from that. And the idea of then coming back to how do I make sure my body is healthy? How do I learn about my cycle? Because this is something also I think like we are not, maybe they touch on it in health class, but I don't remember them telling me I had, a follicular and a luteal phase or any of that. And then how do I actually like apply it to my life? Because the world around me is telling me that I should show up at 100% every day. Every day should be, the same. I should always be able to put in 40 plus hours at work every week. But that's like a man's agenda. And like men can do that. And a lot of men thrive doing that. But like we are different. There's just no getting around it. Like Stacey Sims is famous for saying women are not small men and has done all kinds of fitness and nutrition research on this topic because like we have to acknowledge there are differences if we actually want to thrive.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there are huge differences, and I think a lot of times we've been taught to see those differences as like that we're the weaker sex, which is so far from the truth. It's like if we were really to tap into these differences and allow ourselves to um, harness the power of these differences, we would be in our fullest power as women. We would understand that this is exactly what the world needs more of is us being in touch with our bodies, being in touch with the inner world. That's really the feminine is really the guardian of the inner world, whereas the masculine is really the guardian of the outer world. And like both need each other to thrive. And we've been so much in the outer world, so much in the masculine that the inner world has completely been neglected. And through that, there's so many levels this goes into, but it's like we as women have been divorced from our bodies and like are dealing with so many different hormonal imbalances and health issues because of that. And then we have a whole epidemic of like relationships and men and women not being able to fully find alignment there because we're not fully in our feminine, they're not in their healthy masculine, and that in itself there's a whole imbalance happening. And then if you're looking at the world as a whole too, we've neglected the feminine, we've neglected like mother nature, that in a sense there's an imbalance too. So there's so many different layers that we could like dive into here. But um yeah, really seeing that the feminine and the masculine, they need each other to thrive. And if we neglect each other, we can't support each other in being in our fullest power. And when we are in our fullest power, that's like when we're the strongest, come together too. You know, that polarity is so necessary. So yeah, it is wild how we've really have been taught to just like neglect our cycle, and now it's there's this huge revolution I feel like happening where women are like, wait, this is my like foundation of health, my cycle, and if I neglect it, I'm neglecting the healthiest version of myself essentially. So yeah, it's important for sure.
I think that's a really good point you touched on, because I even notice that myself still sometimes of like if I'm getting closer to my bleed and I don't feel as motivated, let's say I don't want to do a workout, but I had one scheduled or whatever, I will usually have some sort of inner dialogue that's unhelpful about that, of like, come on, just do it. Like you said, you were going to go to the gym, whatever, whatever. But I like how you just kind of reemphasize the more it's not like it's not looking at your cycle as something you have to conquer, right? It's looking at it as how can I work with my body? And that is actually going to get to the healthiest version of me. That is probably what's going to lead to greater strength and like fitness long term and things like that, right?
Totally. Yeah. I love that you bring that up because I think a lot of times especially when we learn about cycle tracking and cycle syncing, I think a lot of women can see it as like, oh, there's these guidelines and like do's and don'ts, and like now I'm not allowed to work out during this part of my cycle, and like that's not what cycle tracking and cycle syncing is about. It's like these guidelines are there to support you, but the intention behind like living with your cycle is learning to listen to your body. That's like the core intention. And so because a lot of the times we have neglected listening to our bodies, we have these guidelines in place now. And these guidelines are really just there to remind you of like, hey, you are in your luteal phase, maybe you shouldn't push yourself to like go work out today, or maybe you should just do a lighter workout, just like almost giving you a permission slip to listen to your body. Like that's really what cycle tracking is all about too, is like just having this permission slip of like you get to be in your fullest power when you listen to these needs of yours. um yeah, and really seeing that your cycle is like it is this container that can hold you.
Mm.
It's not something that's taking you away from whatever it is, like taking you away from like not being allowed to do X, Y, and Z. It's like a container that holds you throughout the month, and makes you also there's more predictability when you follow it. There's more understanding and compassion that comes about it too, more grace with yourself. And these are all things that create yeah, more empowerment within you too. So yeah, it is seeing it as like this initiatory path to freedom is always kind of the way that I like to see it. It is really this built-in ritual that you get to follow so that you can just harness your greatest power in all of it, you know?
And I will say, like, on days that I have listened more to my body instead of pushing through, I always feel better long term.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like if you are overriding, if you're letting your mind, whatever those thoughts are, override the cues from your body, you're usually just like going to feel more tired or more burnt out the
Yeah.
next day.
Yeah.
Instead of like if your body's asking for that recharge and you override it, it's not doing you any favors. So I feel like that's also a great invitation to think about like what are those stories? Where is that voice coming from that's telling me I have to work out anyway, even though I don't feel up to it? And
Right.
that can lead to some major change in your, subconscious and your beliefs long term too.
For sure. Yeah, and realizing that the way that you show up in like, let's say your luteal phase affects the way that your bleed is going to be, will affect the way that you come into your follicular phase, and it's also interconnected. Like every part of your cycle is has its own purpose and its own tasks and needs. And when you really meet them, you then will reap the benefits of every single part of your cycle. And so, let's say in your luteal phase, you're pretending like you're not in your inner autumn. You're pretending like you're still in that like follicular inner spring where you can do everything and everything feels you have more energy and you're just able to be more social and all of that. Like if you're pretending you're still in that and you're late luteal, but like really if you feel into your body, you're not, that in itself can like cause you to have a heavier period or
Mm.
more PMS because you're not actually giving your body what it needs. And so hormonally also your body's like, wait, I am not feeling well, I'm feeling imbalanced. And so you'll feel it. You'll feel your body almost like rebelling against the way that you're showing up. So noting that it's not just about like, oh, I'm more tired, I should rest because whatever. It's like this is actually what will cause you to have a more balanced cycle in the long run. If you struggle with cycle imbalances or just heavy
Mhm.
periods or PMS or whatever it may be, like this in itself will help balance that out too. I think we forget that this is like the simplest, most easiest way to, I mean, maybe not easy, but the simplest way to help balance your cycle out. It's just cycle syncing essentially.
I've never thought about it that way, but that makes like total sense. Could you dig a little bit deeper into that in terms of like let's maybe break down the menstrual cycle a little bit. And I like how you use, inner spring and inner autumn because I hadn't really heard that before following you either. So can you incorporate that too?
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, to give you an overview, our menstrual cycle is, let's say, on average, about 28 days long, give or take. You'll have within that you have four different phases. You start with your menstrual phase, which is your bleed. So this would be around 5 days, give or take, depending on the woman. Um, then we're moving into our follicular phase, and this is really, yeah, after our menstrual phase, our estrogen starts rising again. We have more energy. We feel more social during this time. Our libido is higher, um, and with that, we're coming into our ovulation phase, and this is when our hormones are at their all time high. This is really when we feel like we can take on the world. We're feeling more creative. We're more confident. We feel and look our best a lot of the times too. um, and then we move into our luteal phase. And so that first half of the cycle, we really have our estrogen being dominant. And then the second half of the cycle within our luteal phase, our progesterone is dominant. And so after ovulation, estrogen will drop, progesterone will rise. And progesterone is really almost like a tranquilizer. Like it's the hormone that allows us, it requires us to slow down because it's really what it is. It's the pregnancy hormone. So it's essentially seeing if we need to prepare our body for potential pregnancy. And with that, it's asking us to be more inward, sit more with our inner world. Um, a lot of the times we're emotional. We can feel more sensitive during this time too. And all of that, like I feel like when I say sensitive, more emotional, I think a lot of times we have a negative connotation to that, but like
Mm.
it's actually so powerful when we tap into this in a healthy way, and use the luteal phase in a way to understand what's going on in our inner world to transmute whatever is alive, and then we move it back into menstruation. So progesterone, estrogen will drop, and then our uterine lining will shed, and then that's when we start bleeding again. So each of these phases has an inner season attached to them. So our menstrual phases are inner winter, our follicular phases are inner spring, our ovulation phase is our inner summer, and then our luteal phases are inner autumn. And so as women, every single month we move through this cycle of death and rebirth pretty much, and it's through these like inner seasons. So we move through spring, summer, autumn, winter, and if you think about what these seasons are in our world, right, the way that nature works, how it's all about planting seeds in your spring, and then reaping the abundance of that in your summer, and then really in your autumn, just having it be more of like a shedding and being more inward. Things are getting, there's more, yeah, it's like the world is allowing you to step more into that inner world. And then in your winter, it's all about just hermiting and being
Mhm.
inside, um, resting and being away from the world. And so, like, we literally have these seasons that happen within our external world, and we embody that within our internal world every single month. Um, and so really understanding that these inner seasons, if we tune into them and we allow these different versions of ourselves to come alive through each of the different phases, we can really start tapping into like the greatest power of our cycle, which is just understanding that each of these phases has I guess like a task or a power that allows us to work with our external world by working with our internal world. And there's so much more to it, but that's like in short. Like I work a lot with like feminine archetypes when it comes to these different phases. I work a lot with like understanding just how these different phases can support you like in your work, in your business, in your when you're exercising. Like there's so much to it, but that's like in short. Yeah, talk for it about it for hours.
Right. Yeah. And I think most people are familiar with like cycle tracking these days because there's so much coming out about hormonal birth control. Like I feel like I see a lot of women getting off of that, which is awesome. Thankfully, I had some wherewithal in my 20s to stop that too. But I mean, gosh, I was probably on hormonal birth control of some kind for like nine years, I think, which is just like it's really like sad when I think back because no one ever talked to me about like, hey, these are hormones that are manipulating what your body is naturally meant to be doing. Like, I think if someone would have said it to me in those words, I would have hesitated. But instead, it's just like, you don't want to get pregnant. And even like after having a baby, I'm sure you've probably heard about this. Like, at your traditional 6-week checkup, whether it's with a midwife or an OB, I've heard it both ways. One of the first questions is like, what are you doing about birth control? And I get it because like your body needs time to recover after having a baby and getting pregnant back to back is probably going to do some damage. But like, it's also insane to think like, hey, your body just went through all of these crazy hormonal shifts. Why don't we like add some extra hormones and just like mess with things again? It's so crazy to think about. But anyway, tangent. What I was trying to say is I think most people are familiar with like cycle tracking,
Yeah.
which is like what I do now. But when you say cycle syncing, what does that mean? Are you like talking about syncing it with your lifestyle and like the choices that you're making?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So it's using so you're tracking your cycle, right? And you're allowing with that, by tracking your cycle, you know what phase you're in, you know if you're in your fertile phase, you know if you're about to ovulate. Um, and with that, then when you're in your different phases of your cycle, you can then sync your lifestyle with those different phases. Exactly. So like I was kind of sharing earlier, it's like with those inner seasons, thinking about the qualities of those inner seasons and then allowing yourself um to correlate your lifestyle to that. So let's say in your inner spring, for instance, like my follicular phase, I love to be more social. I plan more social events during that time. As far as like calls or like podcasts and stuff, I try to put all of those in my follicular phase or ovulation phase as much
Mm.
as I can, and just do less during my luteal phase and try to like do all the back end stuff or things I just don't have to be as social with or like on camera. Um, I try to do that in my luteal phase as much as I can. So that, like for instance, that's how I split up my work balance. And obviously, I can't always do that. Sometimes I have to take calls or whatever during my luteal phase. But as much as possible, like I put it in my calendar what phases I'm in, and so I know, okay, this is probably going to be best if I schedule it during this time. For instance, like during my bleed, I don't take any calls. I don't really
Yeah.
go out into the world. I try to do as little social things as possible. Like the first 2 days of my bleed, I stay at home and I have the privilege to do that because I work from home. But I try my best to just like really allow myself to be my own space and really use that time to like meditate and go inward. Um, and yeah, then I also obviously, as far as like um when it comes to nutrition and workouts and all of that, like listening to my body and what it needs to help hormonally and also just like energetically, um, and all of that. So yeah, there's so many different areas of your life you can cycle sync with. And again, like using like when I really cycle sync and use it to my advantage, I feel myself just feeling more balanced because I'm not
Mm.
going against my like inner world and what is alive in within me. But I really just prioritize need it for myself to thrive in that phase, I guess you could say.
What if someone is super new to this? Like, where are some places that they could start?
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to cycle tracking, um, I so this is kind of what I take my clients through is I really try to prioritize 3 months of cycle tracking where every single day you can do this. You can just get a dedicated cycle journal, or you can like print a cycle tracker. I have one linked in my bio for free if anyone wants to download that. But it's really just every single day tracking what you're feeling. So tracking your energy levels, your libido, your appetite, your sleep, maybe any vivid dreams. Yeah, like all these different things that could correlate to your hormones and your cycle, or even like cycle sensitive breast tenderness, or any bloating or cramping or PMS or anxiety, like all these little things that could shift with your cycle because of your cycle. Like just really tracking that for at least like 2 to 3 cycles. And this is what I call level 1 cycle tracking. And what this does is like bringing you so into your body where every single day you're tuning in to see what is
Mm.
alive, tuning into your womb in this way too. And in that, you really just create this relationship to your body and your cycle where you can just through feeling your body, you start to understand where you're at in your cycle. And then once you've done that for 3 months, I call it the next stage of that level 2 cycle tracking, which is all about the fertility awareness method. So cervical mucus tracking, basal body temperature, cervix height, if you want to incorporate that. But the reason why I split this up is because I really think it's so important to first and foremost just have this like foundational connection to your body. And like we were talking about earlier, how divorced a lot of women are to that and like listening to their body, doing that for again like 3 cycles, and then incorporating like tracking their data points of their body and their fertility points in that way. So that there's just yeah, this like foundational relationship. And so if you're completely new to cycle tracking, just start there, like track day one of your period as day one of your cycle. Start there and then just like track what you're experiencing every single day. And doing this for about 2, 3 cycles. And I have an ebook on this too, if anyone's interested in that. But yeah, that's I think the big like the first step I would suggest.
That's such a gift in itself to just like take a moment to connect with your body every day too. I mean, I try to do that now, but there was definitely a period which obviously I have a little one too, which throws throws a wrench in things sometimes, but I've recently gotten back to like being really consistent with taking at least 10 minutes for myself every morning. And just that is like pretty amazing to
Yeah,
like just tap in and notice how I'm feeling. And it can really like everyone has off days too, right? Especially like I didn't have a cycle until I fully weaned my daughter from breastfeeding. And so I've only had a couple bleeds again. And like they've been kind of intense and like emotional roller coasters. And even when it's hard like that, allowing myself to notice it and be with that for a minute, like also helps me approach the day in a different way.
totally.
Like giving yourself grace, basically, you know, and just that practice is like so huge.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like when it comes to tracking your cycle, it doesn't have to be this like huge practice. It can literally 5 minutes of you checking in. I do it at night before I go to bed, just, like about like just go over my day, see how I felt, see what came up. Um, and I do it before I go to bed. Like it literally takes me 5 minutes. Sometimes it takes me longer because I want to journal about something or something came up, but on average it takes me 3 to 5 minutes, so
Yeah.
it's not like a practice that will take up a ton of your day, but just that like little touch point of checking in, like you were saying, like you feel a difference for sure. And you were also just mentioning how you are just coming back into your cycle and it's probably still balancing out,
Mhm.
and creating a relationship with your cycle will help it balance out just even, I don't want to say faster, but in a more intentional way. And just knowing where it's at, like seeing it so it can see you, that's really like that in itself will really help the process of balancing it out. So yeah, I love that you started tracking again. It's such a beautiful practice.
Yeah. And that makes me kind of want to ask if there are, obviously, like there's a lot of things that can go on with the female body as far as like things not being optimal. Um, could we touch on a couple like common, I don't want to say like issues, but like, less than optimal situations with your cycle that maybe
Yeah.
women come to you for help on? I know PCOS, when I was doing nutrition coaching, I worked with a lot of women, like too many. Like, why are doctors throwing around PCOS so much would
Yeah.
maybe be a good one to touch on. But then even, yeah, like maybe irregular cycles or like heavy periods,
Yeah.
any that you see a lot of.
Yeah, I see a lot of irregular cycles for sure. PCOS as well. Um, yeah, I think when it comes to these challenges, is what I like to call them, not like issues or problems, but
There we
challenges.
go. Yep.
Yeah. Is it really, it's so incredible, and I just touched on this, but it's so incredible that the moment a woman starts cycle tracking and syncing and starts learning about these different phases and understanding her unique cycle and what it is that it is, because really what it is, the cycle is such a messenger for a woman. It tells you what is off. If you really tune in and listen, it can tell you where you're not fully showing up or where you're neglecting yourself. And I'm a menstrual cycle coach, so I can't heal, treat, or diagnose. I can just educate you on your cycle and how to cycle track, and with that, allow you to just form a better relationship with your cycle. And so, what I focus on when someone has, let's say, PCOS or irregular cycles or heavy PMS or bleeds, I see that a lot. Or I've worked with women coming off of birth control and wanting to learn their cycle again, and regulating that. Really what I see is that the moment they start just creating relationship with their cycle, like I was just saying, that in itself balances out because they're learning to tune in every single day of what's coming up for them, and seeing how also within these four phases of your cycle, this is something I mentioned earlier, but I work a lot with the feminine archetypes, and each of these different four phases have different feminine archetypes attached to them. And these are essentially like these different versions of women that we experience within ourselves that come alive throughout the cycle. And so I really love to work on the energetics and the emotional aspects of cycle tracking. I obviously I don't work so much with because I can't treat, heal, or diagnose. So I don't work a lot with like herbs or all that stuff because it's just not my scope of practice. But my scope of practice is really just tuning into your cycle, understanding the energetics and the spiritual side of it. And that in itself heals and will regulate your cycle because again, you're tuning into these different versions of yourself that you might have neglected throughout. So sorry, to go back to the feminine archetypes, really the way that the archetypes that I work with mainly are like the maiden within the follicular phase, the mother within the ovulation phase, the sorceress within the luteal phase, and then we have the crone within the menstrual phase. And so each of these different archetypes embody different qualities and also have different aspects that we can tune into and connect to really fully harness the fullest power and potential of our cycle in that. And when we learn about these different qualities of each of the phases and see how maybe we neglect ourselves in a certain phase. For instance, the sorceress has a lot of her qualities are like the wild woman qualities of just being your brutally honest self, your primal self, like your self that just is connected to the earth and kind of almost like just doesn't give a shit about anyone else, but like needing to just express herself authentically.
Mhm.
So many women have like struggle with doing that, they struggle so much with being this wild woman. And when they start tapping into these qualities of themselves and really understanding this luteal phase is just like there for them to just be this like authentically primal self, it's crazy how that in itself starts balancing out cycle things. Like working with women that have had irregular cycles and suddenly their cycle just starts regulating because they're just like tuning into their cycle in these new ways. And understanding themselves in these new ways and not neglecting their body and what needs to become alive through that. So that's kind of like my scope of practice, like what I do
Yeah.
and how I teach women about their cycle. Um, and it's crazy. It's like you wouldn't think that that in itself will balance out your cycle, but it does. Like I've seen it time and time again. And it's again, I think really the biggest thing is just like starting to create a relationship to your cycle is what heals it because it just needs to be seen and wants you to see what messages it has for you so that you can um in return like then yeah, speak back to it and like see it for that, you know?
I would almost argue that that makes more sense than any other method
Yeah.
because we're so brainwashed into like looking outside of ourselves and obviously capitalistic culture too, like to buy something, like we need to buy that, we need to, have this, we need to do that external thing when really like that's disempowering at the root of it because if you come into your body and like remember that your body is either healed, perfectly healed, or in the process of healing, like that's all your body knows how to do. Your body wants to be at optimal levels of health too. So like the more that you can just sink into yourself versus like this is coming from myself who like was always reaching. I still struggle with that for that like reaching mentality versus coming back inwards and remembering that like I have power, my
Yeah.
mind is powerful, my body is always trying to heal. That is the medicine oftentimes.
Totally. And that's exactly, I love that you bring that up because that's exactly what so many women have been taught to neglect is come back to themselves, right? It's like looking outside of themselves, finding validation outside of themselves. And that's not to say that like getting a hormone test and like taking the right herbs and stuff isn't necessary for a lot of women. Like that in itself is so healing too. But if you don't pair that with like coming back to your body, I don't think your body can fully ever heal because it requires the safety um, and the care and the intention. And also something that I think we forget is that being in your feminine means accepting the present moment as it is.
Mm.
Like it means to not achieve or change anything. It means just accept what is alive and just let it come alive and not having to like be different or tweak it or think that you have to um, change it for the better. Like that's just the opposite of what the feminine is all about. So when you're learning about your cycle and you see what is coming up for you and you're accepting that and you're accepting your cycle for what it is and not thinking it's this like thing that you have to heal and change all the time, then that in itself is healing. And it's such a paradox, I almost feel like, but it is. It's again, it's all about coming back to your body and just like being in the present moment with it. Exactly. So yeah, I love that you brought that up. So important.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head saying like what's your intention with it, right? Because that's how I try to approach things like supplements and herbs these days is not looking at them as, hey, will this fix X, Y, and Z challenge I'm looking at, but will this support me? Do I think that this is going to support my body in whatever I'm trying to work towards? And that's like a big, it sounds really small, but for me, that's been huge. Instead of looking at like what's going to fix me is such like a I'm broken lens, right? To like what's just going to support me, what's going to make me feel good along this journey.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, totally. It's my you can take 10 million supplements, but if you're not like actually if you keep running away from like what's actually alive within yourself emotionally and energetically, I don't think those supplements can get to you because you're not allowing it to have
Yeah.
the space to actually heal, you know? So yeah, fully, totally.
Hmm.
It's so important.
Yeah. And so that was kind of a lot on, yeah, how to start optimizing your cycle and honoring it. And I saw you posted recently, I think you shared someone that you worked with. Uh, I think they said they honored their ovulation or something, and then they got pregnant, which is
Yeah.
a fun story. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, this woman literally, all she did was download my cycle guide, like the ebook. I didn't actually work one-on-one with her. And she just started honoring her ovulation she was sharing. And within my cycle guide, I have different rituals for each of the different phases,
Mm.
how to honor these phases for yourself. And yeah, she's like, I started honoring my ovulation. And again, I think she was just present with her cycle, and she got pregnant after a few years of trying and not being able to get pregnant, thinking that she was having fertility issues, which is mind blowing. And obviously, maybe it's like her just learning about when actually she ovulates and like understanding that. But
True.
still, it's like I don't really teach about that in that cycle guidebook though. I don't teach about like knowing your fertile phase, and like your like the fertility awareness method is not in there. It's all about just understanding the 4 phases of your cycle. So I don't know if it had to do with that, but essentially when it comes to honoring your ovulation, if you think about ovulation, it is the purest conception creation energy there is. Like every single person that lives on this planet was created because a woman ovulated. Like, think about that for a second. And we do that every single month if we have a healthy cycle, obviously, but we ovulate every single month. We have the power to create that kind of life every single month. And obviously, if you're not wanting, you're not ready to be a mom, you don't want to, or you're just not in a season of life where you're trying to get pregnant, how can we use that conception creative energy during ovulation to really like conceive something within our lives essentially? Because a lot of the times what happens if we don't do this, and if we don't actually, and this goes back to just like meeting our cycle where it's at with every single phase, and like really honoring it in that, so that like our bleed and our luteal phase can also be a little more easeful. When we're not honoring the conception energy during ovulation, our body can actually start mourning that. And what happens is that in our luteal phase, like in our right before we start our bleed, like that like week before our bleed, that often is like the hardest week for a lot of women. But we can feel a lot of grief or mourning that can come up through that, or even having a heavier bleed because our body is mourning not having used that conception energy during ovulation. And so really during ovulation, I always tell women like, okay, what is it that you're trying to bring to life right now in your life? It doesn't have to be like a creative project, but just like something that you're wanting to pour life force energy into. And how can you use your ovulation phase and your ovulation energy, that like inner summer, to do so? How can you really honor that for yourself? And also, if you think about your cervix position during this time, like it is higher and more open. It's the most open that it will be throughout the cycle. And so it's all about like this like receiving of goodness and abundance, and
Mm.
also having like this, yeah, this energetic discernment of what you allow into your space, and how much you also give, because we have so much, like during ovulation we a lot of times have so much energy. We're like, we can do all these things and we can show up for all these different people, and um get all these things done, but really if we do too much of that, then we are depleting ourselves. Are depleting our life force. So being discerning of like, what is it that we're speaking life into? What is it that we're giving life to? And so all these things, honoring our ovulation in those ways. And there's so much more to it, but that's essentially like just knowing that in itself, like really being yeah, being this like queen persona during or queen archetype during ovulation, that just like is here to create and manifest her desires. And in that, her whole entire cycle is able to balance out more, which, yeah, it's like just another way to honor your cycle, I guess you could say.
And I think that really highlights what you were saying earlier of like your cycle can really empower you
Yeah.
and enhance your life, where so many of us think of it as like a chore or, annoying that like every day over 28 plus or minus days feels different. But it's, yeah, it's like a beautiful experiment that we get to work with and dance with. And it's kind of magical that we have those moments, like even if you're not calling in a baby, to call in, like you said, abundance, and call in love and all these beautiful things into your life. And guys don't get that.
They have other beautiful
They have
things.
other things, but we get that special.
Yeah, it is super special. And something that I always love to share with my clients is like, we were taught in school that that it's the fastest sperm that gets to the finish line and what
I
conceives
know what
that.
you're going to say.
When actually that's so far from the truth. It is the egg that chooses the sperm. That is the sperm that will provide her exactly what she needs in order for her to conceive the best possible baby, essentially. And so I think that is like, it just always blows my mind when when I speak about that, because it's like it really moving from this like patriarchal way of like conquering and like survival of the fittest kind of like energy, from like, okay, wait, when I just allow myself to be this magnetic self about and like be this woman that just knows her worth and knows that she is this like queen, I can choose and receive my highest desires in that way, because that really is the purest essence of the feminine. And we've been taught otherwise. We were taught that the sperm chooses us essentially, which nope, they don't.
Yeah, I just was listening to a podcast, a Free Birth Society podcast, and I heard the woman on there say, yeah, it's not like the strongest, fastest sperm that gets through and like penetrates the egg. The egg invites in the
Exactly.
sperm that she chooses. And I'm like, I like that. I like that.
Yep. Yep. It's all about inviting in your desires for
Hmm.
like forcefulness. That's just very masculine,
Yeah.
which time and place. But yeah.
Hmm. And so one thing I wanted to ask you too before we wrap up is, what can women do who are not cycling? Obviously, if it's like hypothalamic amenorrhea and they don't have a cycle because they're too lean or something else is going on, that's obviously something they want to address. But if someone is pregnant, like me breastfeeding, I never got my cycle back, or even like in their wise women
Yeah.
era, like post-menopause, what are some other ways that women can kind of tap into some of this energy?
Yeah. So yeah, it depends. So someone who's like in their wise woman era where they're menopause, postmenopause, that I always say track the moon phases.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really what we're tracking, is we're tracking your own moon. And so if you're wanting to tap into that cyclical nature of being a woman, the moon allows you to do that. So new moon being day one, new moon qualities are very similar to our menstrual phase and our inner winter qualities. And then full moon is ovulation. So it'd be like you and your fullest self, like the moon being in its fullest self, right? So you can track the moon. Even when you're pregnant, you could track the moon. Something that's really cool though during pregnancy is that you actually really move through these seasons. So moving through your inner winter, right when you you get pregnant, like early stages of pregnancy, then moving into your inner spring and your inner summer, like second trimester, and then third trimester, really moving into that inner autumn. And then once you like the process of giving birth, and then right the few I guess few weeks after giving birth, when you're really postpartum, like fresh into that, that's all, again your inner winter again. So you're
Mm-hmm.
really moving through their own little cycle and
Yeah, I
season.
never really thought about it like that, but that totally makes sense.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And so you totally could track the moon during that time if you wanted
Yeah.
to as a pregnant woman, but you are literally going through this the bigger cycle in itself, where you are creating life, and then when you are giving birth, you're also going through a death process of letting go of this old version of yourself, and then birthing yourself as a
Mhm.
mother. So
Mhm.
you are going through a cycle in that as well. Um, so yeah, and then when you're going through or not postmenopause, postpartum, you are very much also going through another whole other cycle in itself, and that,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you've experienced. Um, so yeah, you can totally use the moon, but also just like know that you are in your own cycle in itself, and just allowing yourself to feel, okay, what inner season am I in right now? And yeah, just listening to your body in that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure just with checking in with yourself every day, like if you make that a more regular practice, it's almost like you'll just kind of know where
Yeah.
you're at
Yeah.
in those cycles, whether you're, bleeding super regular or not. It seems like, yeah, if you're just consistently checking in with yourself, you're gonna realize like, oh, I feel like this, and this is my
Yeah.
pattern right now, and this is what's calling to me, and honoring that, I think no matter what, really is
Yeah.
just going to serve you long term.
Yeah. And with that, it's like checking with your womb because your womb's doing
Hmm.
so many different processes, especially when you're pregnant and then after you give birth and all of that. It's like there's so many like yeah, there's just a whole world in there that's doing what it needs to do. And when you check in with your womb and just really see, okay, what's alive, what's present for me right now, how can I best support my body, my womb in this way? Like, yeah, that in itself is womb healing, just checking in with your womb, you know? So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
beautiful process once you start allowing yourself to do that.
Yeah. I didn't really ask you that much about womb healing. Is that kind of like one of your go-to processes, is just like honoring what's more, more of that, like honoring what's going on? And
Yeah, well, yeah, there's so many different layers to womb healing, I guess you could say too. I feel like cycle tracking and cycle syncing itself is womb healing because you are just
mm,
listening to your womb, what's alive there.
yeah.
I also I did a whole like womb practitioner certification of just really teaching women and helping women with a guidance of like tuning into what's alive there and listening to anything that they might have held on to in their womb space, whether it's sexual trauma or birth trauma, or they've experienced a miscarriage or an abortion. You know, all these different things can cause trauma into our womb, or even like past sexual partners that they're still lingering in there, and they don't actually that energy doesn't serve us anymore. So there's so many different ways you can go about womb healing, but yeah, it's all about just tuning into what's present in there and seeing if there's any blockages that are causing imbalances. Because a lot of times our imbalances within the cycle can also be caused by just like traumas that happen to our womb, you know, or us not ever feeling into our womb too, us just
Mm.
completely neglecting it because it never felt safe to do so because there is trauma in there or whatever else it may be. So there's so many different layers to it. So I depending on the client, if that is necessary, I'll dive into that with them. It's definitely something I want to create more offerings around. It's a very specific and intentional practice that I don't
Yeah.
think you can just throw out there. It's like you really want to do it with someone that also kind of knows and understands what's going on versus it just yeah, like a lot can come up, you know, especially if you have trauma there. So yeah, that is the essence of womb healing, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add too, I feel like there's a generational component there. Like that was, gosh, you just made me remember part of an ayahuasca ceremony I sat in several months ago. And my second night in ceremony, most of the night was spent doing like maternal lineage healing. And
Wow.
it was a wild, but like there was an opportunity for like all the women I've called on in my life, like through pregnancy and birth, me being able to be a vessel for them to like have some healing through me. And it was like super intense and super emotional, but afterwards just was incredible. And it felt like, actually, gosh, that was the second time I've had something with my womb come up in a psychedelic ceremony, which is interesting. But yeah, I feel like there's a generational element there, and also like a very mystical, like spiritual element connected to the womb as well. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, generational for sure. I had a similar experience with my feeling my grandmother and her beliefs come up and it's me holding them, but they're not mine. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how we can hold that and how there's this generational ancestral thing. Um, and that we are the keepers of that. And like while there can be trauma, there can also be so much healing and so much yeah, so many gifts in that too. And yeah, the other thing you're saying, it's like the mystical part of the womb. Yeah, like thinking about it as its own little universe, really. Like
Mm.
it can bring life into the physical, you know, and that's amazing. So it is this whole, there's just, it's almost like this like void where anything can come to life, whether it's an actual like human life or you birthing something else. It's like living from your womb is really yeah, living from that void and allowing anything to come up through that. So, yeah, I love
Yeah.
that a journey and a ceremony around that. That's so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we forget it's like, gosh, just again, echoing, like it's such a gift. It's a
Yeah.
portal in itself. Like the fact that we have this womb, like it is a spiritual portal and it is a gift. Remembering that on your bleed days that maybe are hard.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, seeing what the bleed is helping you release, to
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a nice way to think of it too.
It's really and knowing that it's there to help you transmute what needs to be transmuted and not there as like a punishment for you to feel pain or whatever else. Like, no,
Mhm.
it's doing the work for you and it's asking you to help or support it in doing so. So yeah, meeting it there.
Yeah. Ah, beautiful place to wrap up. Before I let you go, where can people find you, find these resources that you mentioned?
Yeah, so my Instagram account is at Bloom. You spell Bloom Blume. It's actually the German word for flower. I am German originally. That's kind of where it came from. But yeah, and as far as like the resources, they're all linked in my bio, in my Stan store there. Yeah, and really my offerings right now, I have one-on-one coaching I do, and I have a retreat coming up end of August. And I will most likely also be holding more of those in the upcoming year. And then I'm working on a big group coaching program when it comes to cycle tracking, cycle syncing, all of that. And that will probably be available within the next few months too, hopefully. But yeah,
Wow, amazing.
yeah, I'm excited for it.
Cool. Thank you. I will link your Instagram so people can find all that below. And yeah, thank you so much for your wisdom today. I think this can help everyone who listens. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Bye, everyone.